There is a teaching so radical in Neville Goddard's work that most who encounter it turn away without fully hearing it. Not because it's complicated, but because it demands the death of the one who is listening. Neville called it the I Am. Eckhart Tolle called it the dissolution of the pain body. The mystics of every tradition have pointed to it with trembling fingers, the moment when the small self, with all its accumulated wounds and stories and defenses, must step aside so that God-pure, unconditioned awareness can take its place. But here's what makes Neville's teaching so devastatingly clear. He didn't ask you to transcend the ego by years of meditation or ascetic practice. He told you that the ego is already dead. You've just been animating its corpse with your imagination, feeding it with every "I am not" statement you unconsciously repeat. I am not worthy. I am not loved. I am not enough. Neville said that the end of suffering and the beginning of creation comes when you stop identifying with the limitation and recognize what remains when all that falls away. What Neville called I Am is what the mystics have always called God-consciousness. And in his 1970s lecture, I Am the Resurrection, he delivered the most complete map of ego death you will find anywhere in spiritual literature, not as philosophy, but as lived experience. So the question hanging before us today is this: what dies when the ego dies? And what, if anything, is resurrected in its place? Welcome to Neville Goddard Universe. I'm glad you're here. This channel exists because Neville Goddard's teachings are not isolated insights. They are part of a living stream of mystical truth that flows through every genuine spiritual tradition. And when you begin to see Neville's work reflected in the language of other systems, whether it's the psychology of Eckhart Tolle, the ego dissolution of the mystics, or the occult understanding of consciousness as the only reality, something profound happens. You stop seeing these as separate teachings and start recognizing them as one teaching, spoken in different tongues. Today, we're beginning a series on what might be the most essential concept in Neville's entire body of work, the I Am. Not as a phrase to chant or a metaphysical curiosity, but as the lived experience of ego death, the destruction of the false self and the awakening to God consciousness. We're going to explore how Neville's teaching on the I Am maps perfectly onto what modern spiritual teachers like Eckhart Tolle call the dissolution of the pain body, and what the great mystics have always recognized as the necessary death that precedes resurrection. And we're going to do it practically, not just philosophically, because Neville always insisted that this teaching is useless unless it transforms your life. So by the end of this episode, you'll have a clear, step-by-step practice for recognizing and releasing the I am not statements that keep the ego alive, and for claiming the only identity that's ever been true. If this kind of exploration resonates with you, if you sense that there's a deeper unity beneath the surface differences of these teachings, then this channel is for you. A like or a subscription helps this work reach others who are searching for the same thread, and I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Let's begin. Neville Goddard taught that the phrase I Am is the name of God, not a name God has, but the name God is. When Moses stood before the burning bush and asked who was sending him, the voice replied, I am that I am. And Neville said, this is not a being separate from you. This is your own consciousness, aware of being aware. Now, that sounds abstract until you realize what Neville meant by it. He wasn't saying you are a god among other gods, or that your personality is divine. He was saying the exact opposite. He was saying that the personality you think of as you, the accumulation of memories, wounds, fears, social roles, and self-concepts, is not I Am. It is something you have imagined yourself to be. It is a mask consciousness has worn for so long that it forgot it was wearing one. Neville called this false self the old man. Paul called it the same. In Ephesians, Paul writes, put off the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Neville read that passage not as moral instruction, but as mystical psychology. The old man is the ego. The new man is I am, clothed in whatever state of consciousness you choose to inhabit. Here's how Neville put it in a lecture from 1969. You are not the man or woman the world sees. You are pure consciousness, aware of being aware. Everything else, your name, your history, your self-concept, is a costume consciousness has put on. And when you know this, you can take the costume off and put on another one. But you must first know that you are not the costume. Now, most people hear this and nod and move on. But Neville was deadly serious. He said the entire spiritual journey is the process of disidentifying from the old man, from the accumulated self-image, and identifying solely with I am. And he said, this is not a metaphor. It is ego death. It is the literal dissolution of the psychological structure you have mistaken for yourself. Let me give you an example of what this looks like in lived experience. There's a testimony in The Law and the Promise from a woman who had spent years imagining herself as unlovable. She'd built an entire identity around this belief. I am the kind of woman men leave. That was her hidden self-concept, and it played out with mechanical precision in every relationship. She didn't consciously choose this identity. It had formed from early wounds, repeated disappointments, interpretations of events that hardened into a self-image. Neville would call this the old man. It's a psychological structure built of past assumptions that now governs the present. Neville told her, you are not the woman men leave. That is not I am. That is a state you have been imagining yourself into, and you can stop. He didn't tell her to heal her wounds or process her trauma. He told her to die to that identity entirely, to let it fall away, and to claim a new one. I am loved. I am cherished. I am the kind of woman a man cannot imagine being without. She did. And the shift wasn't gradual, it was immediate. Not because her outer circumstances changed overnight, but because the self that would have attracted abandonment no longer existed. She had killed it. And in its place she clothed I am in a new assumption. Within weeks, the outer world mirrored the inner shift. A new relationship appeared, or rather, consciousness, now operating from a different state, drew to itself the corresponding experience. This is what Neville meant by putting off the old man. It's not self-improvement, it's not healing the ego. It's recognizing that the ego, the entire structure of I am this kind of person with this kind of history and these kinds of limitations, is not real. It is a habit of imagination, and habits can be broken. But here's where Neville went deeper than most teachers. He said that the old man doesn't die willingly. It clings. It defends itself. It generates endless justifications for why you are what you think you are. And it uses one primary tool to keep itself alive, the phrase, I am not. Every time you say, I am not worthy, you are feeding the old man. Every time you think, I am not the kind of person who gets what I want, you are giving life to the false self. Neville said these, I am not. Statements are the nails that keep the old man on the cross. And resurrection. The awakening of the new man can only happen when you stop hammering them in. So the teaching is this. The ego is not something you have to fight. It is something you have to stop believing in. And the moment you withdraw your belief, your imaginative consent, it collapses. What remains is, I am, pure, unconditioned, free. And Neville said, when you know yourself as I am and nothing else, you can clothe yourself in any state you choose. You are no longer bound by history. You are no longer defined by circumstance. You are consciousness, imagining, and the world is yourself pushed out. This is why Neville called his teaching the resurrection, because it is the death of the false self and the awakening of God within you, not as a distant deity, but as your own awareness, finally freed from the costume it wore for so long. And this brings us to the other language, the parallel tradition that describes the exact same process with startling clarity. Eckhart Tolle, in The Power of Now and a New Earth, describes something he calls the pain body. It is, he says, an accumulated emotional entity that lives in the human psyche, a structure built from past pain, unprocessed emotion, and repetitive thought patterns. It has a kind of semi-autonomous existence. It feeds on negative thinking. It craves drama and conflict. And most importantly, it has a survival instinct. It doesn't want to be dissolved. It wants to be fed. Tolle writes, "The pain body is an addiction to unhappiness. It is the part of you that identifies with suffering and creates situations that will ensure its continued existence." Now, if you've studied Neville, you should be hearing echoes, because the pain body is the old man. It's the same psychological structure, described in modern psychological language rather than biblical metaphor. The old man, in Neville's teaching, is the accumulated self-concept built from past assumptions, reinforced by inner conversations, sustained by unconscious imagination. It is the voice that says, "This is who I am. This is what I deserve. This is what always happens to me." And just like Tolle's pain body, it resists dissolution. It generates thoughts and feelings that confirm its existence. It doesn't want you to imagine differently, because if you imagine differently, it ceases to exist. Neville said the old man is crucified, nailed to the cross by your "I am not" statements. Tolle says the pain body feeds on negative identification, on thoughts like, "I am a victim, I am a failure, I am always alone." These are the same thing. The crucifixion and the feeding are the same process. And both teachers say the same thing about liberation. You do not heal the pain body. You do not redeem the old man. You let it die. Tolle writes, "The moment you observe the pain body, the moment you bring awareness to it without identifying with it, it begins to lose its power. It can only survive in unconsciousness." Neville said it this way, "You must die to what you have been. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot be the old man and the new man at the same time. You must choose." So the mysticism of ego death, whether spoken by Neville or Tolle, is this: the false self is not you. It is a structure of thought and feeling that you have mistakenly identified with. And the moment you withdraw your identification, the moment you stop feeding it with your imagination, it collapses. What remains is I am, pure presence, God consciousness. Now, let me take this deeper into Neville's own language, because there's a lecture he gave in the 1970s, late in his life, called I Am the Resurrection. It's one of the most overlooked and most profound things he ever recorded. In it, he describes ego death not as theory, but as lived mystical experience. He begins by quoting John 11, I am, the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. And then he says something startling. He says that he that believeth in me means he who believes that I am is God. Not believes in a distant Savior, but believes that his own awareness, his own consciousness, is the creative power of the universe. And when you believe that, Neville says, the old man dies. The false self, with all its limitations, is resurrected as a new state. He describes it this way: you will feel the death. You will feel the old self falling away. And it is frightening, because you have identified with it for so long. But you must let it die. And when it does, you will know yourself as I am. And from that state, you can assume anything. This is the apex of Neville's teaching. This is where his mysticism becomes undeniable. He's not talking about positive thinking or visualization. He's talking about the dissolution of the psychological self and the awakening of God consciousness within you. And Tolle, from a completely different tradition, coming out of Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta rather than Christian mysticism, arrived at the same place. He says, when you disidentify from the pain body, you realize that you are not the accumulated past. You are the presence that is aware of it. And that presence is what some traditions call God. So here's the convergence. Neville's old man is Tolle's pain body. Neville's I am is Tolle's presence. And the path both describe is identical. Withdrawal of identification from the false self, and recognition of the true self as unconditioned awareness. But there's a crucial difference, and it's one that makes Neville's teaching even more radical. Tolle says, once you recognize the pain body, you observe it and it dissolves. You become present. And that's the end of suffering. Neville says, once you recognize the old man, you don't just become present, you become creative. You don't just witness consciousness, you direct it. You don't just dissolve the false self. You clothe the true self in whatever state you choose. Neville's mysticism includes ego death, but it doesn't end there. It ends with conscious creation. It ends with I am becoming whatever you imagine yourself to be. So the title of this episode, Only I Am Remains, is not passive. It's not about resting in emptiness. It's about recognizing that when the old man is gone, what remains is infinite potential. I am, unqualified, unlimited, free. And from that state, you imagine the life you choose to live. Not from the perspective of the wounded self trying to get what it lacks, but from the perspective of God, assuming a state and letting the world conform. That's why Neville's teaching is not just mysticism. It's practical mysticism. It's ego death in service of conscious creation. And that's the teaching we carry forward today. So let's move from the mystical to the practical, because this is where Neville always lived. He said, test it, try it, don't believe me, prove it to yourself. And the practice we're going to work with today is simple, direct, and devastatingly effective, recognizing and releasing the I am not statements that keep the old man alive. Here's the foundation. The old man, the ego, the pain body, the false self, survives on negative self-definition. It lives in statements like, I am not confident, I am not successful, I am not the kind of person who gets opportunities, I am not lovable, I am not enough. These statements feel true because you've repeated them so many times that they've hardened into identity. But Neville said, they are not true, they are imaginative habits, and habits can be broken, so the first step is to catch them. And you do this by paying attention to your inner conversations, especially the ones that run quietly, just beneath conscious awareness. These are the conversations, Neville said, determine your outer world more than any conscious effort. Tonight, or over the next few days, I want you to become a witness to your own inner speech. Not judging it, not trying to fix it yet, just noticing. When something doesn't go the way you want, what do you say to yourself? When you imagine a desired outcome, what voice rises up to say, but that's not for me? When you think about yourself in relation to others, what quiet comparisons do you make? Listen, and write down every I am not statement you catch. Make a list. Be ruthlessly honest. No one else will see this. This is between you and consciousness. Here's what you'll discover. You have been crucifying the new man, the I am, every day with these statements. You've been nailing yourself to a cross of limitation with your own imagination. So the second step is to release them. And Neville gave you a specific method for this. He called it revision, but in this context, it's deeper than that. It's not just revising an event. It's revising identity. Take one I am not statement from your list. Let's say it's I am not confident. Now, here's what most people do. They try to affirm the opposite. They say, I am confident, but they don't believe it, so it bounces off. The old man is still there, stronger than ever, because you've just confirmed that you're trying to become something you're not. Neville said, don't do that. Instead, die to the one who is not confident. Let that self fall away entirely. And then, from the stillness that remains, claim, I am. Here's how you do it. Sit quietly, close your eyes. And instead of trying to feel confident, simply rest in the awareness that you exist. You are. I am. That's all. No qualities attached, no history. No limitations. Just pure awareness. Aware of being aware. Stay there. Let the old self, the one who was not confident, dissolve into that awareness. It's not real. It was never real. It was a costume, and you're taking it off. And then, from that place of I am, without effort or strain, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Not, I am becoming confident. Not, I hope to be confident. But the quiet, natural feeling of being the one who is confident. Not as a future goal, but as present reality. Neville said, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and the assumption, though false if persisted in, will harden into fact. But he also said, the assumption can only take root when you've stopped identifying with the opposite. You can't be the old man and the new man at the same time. The old man must die. So you're not layering confidence on top of insecurity. You're letting insecurity dissolve, and what naturally remains is the state you choose to inhabit. Do this with one statement at a time. Take, I am not, and let it die. Then claim I am, clothed in the opposite assumption. And here's the practical instruction Neville gave in. I am the resurrection. Do this in SATS, the state akin to sleep. Because in that drowsy state, the old man's defenses are down. The pain body, in Tolle's language, is less active. Consciousness is more fluid, more impressionable, and assumptions planted in that state take root deeply. So tonight, as you're drifting off to sleep, bring to mind one I am not statement that has governed your life. See it clearly. And then, with no force, let it go. Watch it dissolve. And in its place, assume the opposite as already true. Feel it. Don't visualize it. Feel it. Let the feeling be the last thing you hold as you fall asleep. Neville said, sleep in the assumption, and you will wake in its likeness. But before you can sleep in the new assumption, you must die to the old one. That's the resurrection. Death first, then life. And if you do this, if you make this a practice, not just a one-time experiment, you will discover something extraordinary. The world begins to conform, not because you forced it to, but because the state you are imagining from determines what you see. When you stop imagining from limitation, limitation stops appearing. One more thing. Tolle said the pain body can't survive in the light of awareness. Neville said, the old man dies when you stop feeding it with imagination. These are the same instruction. So the practice is this. Witness the I am not statements without identifying with them. See them as habits, not truth. And then consciously withdraw your imaginative consent. Stop repeating them. Stop believing them. Let them starve. And what remains, when the false self has finally fallen away, is the only thing that was ever true. I am. Let's step back now and look at what we've uncovered. Because something profound happens when you see Neville's teaching on I am reflected in the language of ego death across mystical traditions. You realize this is not one man's philosophy. This is a truth that consciousness keeps discovering about itself, in every culture, in every era, whenever someone looks deeply enough inward. Neville spoke of the old man and the new man. Tolle speaks of the pain body and presence. The Buddhists speak of the dissolution of the sense of self and the recognition of emptiness, not as void, but as the ground of all possibility. The Vedantists speak of Atman realizing itself as Brahman, the individual self-awakening to its identity as universal consciousness. The Christian mystics, from Meister Eckhart to John of the Cross, spoke of the dark night of the soul, the death of the ego self so that God could be born within. They're all pointing at the same experience. The language differs. The cultural context differs. But the core insight is identical. The self you think you are is not real. It is a construct, a habit, a costume. And liberation. whether you call it resurrection, enlightenment, or awakening, comes when you stop identifying with the construct and recognize what you truly are. Neville called it I am. Tolle calls it presence. Ramana Maharshi called it the self. Jesus called it the kingdom of God within. But the experience they're describing is one, unconditioned awareness, aware of itself, free from the accumulation of past identity. And here's why this convergence matters. It tells you that this teaching is not cultural, it's not religious, it's not even spiritual in the narrow sense. It's structural. It's how consciousness works. When you look deeply enough into the nature of your own awareness, you discover that the self you've been defending, protecting, and improving doesn't exist. It's a story you've been telling. And when you stop telling it, what remains is infinite. Neville said, "You are not in the world. The world is in you." That's not poetry, it's mystical psychology. It means that the world you see is a reflection of the state of consciousness you're imagining from. And the state you imagine from is determined by what you believe yourself to be. So if you imagine from the old man, from limitation, from lack, from I am not, the world mirrors that. But if you imagine from I am, unqualified and free, the world mirrors that instead. And this is what makes Neville's teaching so uniquely powerful. Most mystical traditions stop at ego death. They say, dissolve the self and rest in presence. And that's profound. That's liberation. But Neville said, and then what? Once you know yourself as I am, what do you do with that knowledge? His answer, you create, you assume, you imagine. You clothe I am in whatever state you choose, and you let the world conform. So Neville's mysticism is not quietistic. It's not about retreating into stillness. It's about using stillness as the foundation for deliberate creation. And that's the deeper implication of this episode. The convergence of mystical traditions shows you that ego death is real. It's not a metaphor. It's a lived experience that consciousness can have of itself. But Neville's contribution, his unique insight, is that ego death is not the end. It's the beginning. It's the clearing of the ground so that you can build something new. Not from the wounded self trying to escape its wounds, but from I am, imagining freely. So when you see Neville and Tolle and the mystics all pointing at the same truth, what you're really seeing is a roadmap. First, recognize the old man. Second, withdraw your identification from it. Third, let it die. Fourth, rest in I am. And fifth, and this is where Neville stands alone. Assume the state you choose to live in, and watch the world reflect it back to you. That's the full teaching. And it works because it's true. Not true in the sense of provable by external evidence, but true in the sense that it describes the actual structure of consciousness. And when you live from that structure, when you stop feeding the false self and start creating from I am, your life transforms. Not gradually, not eventually, immediately. Because the world is your self pushed out, and the self you're pushing out has changed. So we return to the title that brought you here. Only I am remains. Now you know what that means. It's not a state of emptiness. It's not the end of selfhood. It's the death of the false self and the awakening of the true one. It's the moment when the old man, with all his accumulated wounds and limitations and I am not statements, finally falls away. And what's left is consciousness, pure and free, ready to imagine itself into any state it chooses. Neville said, I am is the way, not a way, the way, the way. And every mystical tradition that has ever looked deeply into the nature of the self has arrived at the same place. The language may differ. The practices may differ. But the truth is, 1, you are not who you think you are I am. And from that realization, everything becomes possible. If this exploration has opened something for you, if you feel that shift beginning, that quiet loosening of the old identity, then I'm grateful you're here. A like or a subscription helps this work reach others who are searching for the same thread, and it means more than you might think. This is not just a channel. It's a community of minds walking the same path, recognizing the same truth in different languages. Tonight, as you fall asleep, take one "I am not" statement with you, see it clearly, and then let it go, let it dissolve, let it die. And in its place, assume the state you've always wanted to live from. Not as something you're trying to become, but as something you already are, once the false self is gone. Sleep in that assumption, and let the resurrection happen naturally. The old man is already dead, you've just been carrying his memory. And when you stop, when you finally let him go, what remains is the only thing that was ever real. I am. Unconditioned, unlimited, free. Neville said it this way: you are all imagination, and imagination is God. So when you know yourself as I am, you know yourself as the creator, not of the world out there, but of the world you see. And that changes everything. The mystics had been saying this for centuries. Neville made it practical. And now, it's yours. Only I am remains. And from that place you imagine the life you choose to live. Not someday. Not when you're healed or ready or worthy. Now. Because I am is always now. And now is all there is.